I was 13 years old the night my parents erased me from their lives. It wasn't something they announced with cruelty or anger. There was no shouting, no dramatic goodbye that almost made it worse. It was quiet, too quiet, like something was already over before I even realized it had begun. The sky was heavy with clouds that evening, swollen with rain that hadn't fallen yet. I remember watching them through the car window, my reflection staring back at me small, confused, and uneasy. My mother sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her fingers trembling like she was holding something in. "Where are we going?" I asked softly. No answer. My father kept his eyes on the road. His jaw was tight, the way it always was when he didn't want to talk. I had seen that look before, but never like this. This time it felt final. The car stopped in a place I didn't recognize, an empty roadside near a closed shop, its metal shutters pulled down like a sealed mouth. There were no people, no lights except a flickering street lamp that buzzed faintly above us. My stomach twisted. "Why are we here?" I asked again, louder this time. My father turned off the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Get out," he said. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "What? Take your bag and get out." My heart started pounding. "Dad, what's going on?" My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just listen to him." That was when I noticed the suitcase at my feet. I hadn't packed it. A cold wave of realization washed over me, but my mind refused to accept it. This didn't make sense. Parents didn't just leave their kids, not like this, not without explanation. "This isn't funny," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. "If this is a joke, it's not. It's not a joke." My father cut in sharply. The words hit harder than any slap. I looked at my mother, searching for something, anything, that would tell me this wasn't real. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Tears clung to her lashes, but she didn't let them fall. "Mom." My voice cracked. She shook her head slightly, as if she couldn't bear to speak. That silence said everything. My hand started to shake as I slowly picked up the suitcase. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just clothes. Like it held the weight of something breaking. I stepped out of the car. The air was thick and damp, the scent of rain hanging just before the storm. I stood there, clutching the handle of the suitcase, waiting for someone to explain, to stop me, to say this was all some terrible misunderstanding. The car door shut behind me with a hollow thud. "Stay here," my father said through the open window. "We'll come back." I nodded automatically, because what else was I supposed to do? They were my parents. You're supposed to believe your parents. The engine started again. For a second, I felt relief. Of course they were coming back. Maybe they forgot something. Maybe this was temporary. The car pulled away. I stood there, watching the red taillights fade into the darkness, expecting, hoping. They would slow down, turn around, come back. They didn't. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sky finally broke, and rain poured down in heavy sheets, soaking through my clothes, my hair, my skin. I didn't move. I couldn't. If I left, what if they came back and I wasn't there? So I stayed. I stayed as cars passed without stopping. I stayed as the street lamp flickered above me. I stayed as the cold seeped into my bones. They'll come back. I whispered to myself over and over, like if I said it enough, it would become true. But deep down, something inside me already knew. No one was coming. By the time the rain slowed to a drizzle, my voice had gone quiet. My hope had too. I sank down onto the wet pavement, pulling my knees to my chest, the suitcase still beside me, the only proof that I had belonged somewhere once. That was the night I learned something no child ever should. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who leave you behind. and sometimes they never come back. The first morning after they left me didn't feel real. I woke up stiff, cold, and disoriented, curled against my suitcase like it could protect me from the world. For a few seconds I forgot everything, then it all came crashing back. The car, the rain, the empty road. I sat up quickly, scanning the street. They weren't there. Of course they weren't. But a small, stubborn part of me still expected to see that car pulling back. My mother rushing out, apologizing, wrapping me in her arms like none of this had happened. Instead, there were only strangers passing by, their eyes sliding over me like I didn't exist. Hunger hit me hard that morning. It wasn't the kind you feel before lunch. It was sharp, painful, and constant. I hadn't eaten since the day before, and I didn't know when I would again. I dragged my suitcase with me as I walked, not knowing where I was going. Every step felt heavier than the last, not just from exhaustion, but from the growing weight of reality. I was alone, completely. By the second day, confusion had turned into fear. By the third, fear started turning into something else, something harder. I realized quickly that no one was going to save me. Not the strangers who avoided eye contact. Not the shopkeepers who waved me away. Not the world that kept moving like I didn't matter. If I wanted to survive, I had to figure it out myself. The first time I asked someone for help, they ignored me. The second time, they told me to leave. The third time, I stopped asking. Instead, I watched, I learned, I adapted. I learned which places threw out food at night, and how to get there before others did. I learned which streets were safer to sleep on and which ones to avoid. I learned how to make myself invisible when I needed to, and loud when I had to protect what little I had. But survival came with a cost. Trust became dangerous. One night, I met a boy a few years older than me. He smiled, offered me food, and told me I could stick with him, that it was safer together. For a moment, I believed him. I wanted to believe him, but the next morning, my suitcase was gone. Everything I had left of my old life. My clothes, my memories, the last pieces of who I used to be, disappeared without a trace. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because something inside me had already started to shut down. Crying didn't bring things back. It didn't make people kinder. It just made you weak in a world that punished weakness. So I hardened. Days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Time lost its meaning when every day was about the same thing: finding food, finding shelter, staying safe. I took whatever work I could get. Cleaning floors in the back of shops, carrying heavy boxes, running errands for people who barely looked at me. Sometimes they paid me, sometimes they didn't. I learned not to argue. I learned to take what I could get and move on. At night, when the world grew quiet, the loneliness crept in the strongest. That was when the memories came back, the sound of my mother's voice, the feeling of having a home, the version of me that still believed in something. I hated that version, because he was gone. In his place was someone else, someone sharper, colder, more aware. Someone who understood that the world didn't care if you were 13 or 30. It only cared if you could survive. There were moments, small, quiet moments, when I almost gave up. When the exhaustion felt too heavy, when the hunger felt endless, when the emptiness inside me felt like it might swallow me whole. But every time I got close to breaking, something pulled me back. A thought, a feeling, a memory of that night. The rain, the car driving away, their promise to come back, and the truth that followed. They left me. They chose to leave me. That thought burned inside me like fire, and slowly, that fire turned into something powerful. Not hope, not forgiveness, but determination. If no one wanted me, then I would build a life that didn't need anyone. If the world refused to care, then I would force it to notice me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was changing. Becoming something stronger than the scared, abandoned kid I used to be. Because the boy who waited in the rain for his parents to come back wasn't coming back either. Survival teaches you how to stay alive. But it doesn't teach you how to live. That lesson came later slowly, painfully, and one step at a time. By the time I was 16, I wasn't the same person who had been left on that roadside. I had grown taller, stronger, sharper. My eyes noticed everything, my mind calculated constantly. I knew how to read people before they spoke, how to sense danger before it arrived. But inside, there was still a hollow space, a space where something softer used to exist. One evening, while sweeping the back of a small shop for a few coins, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Education is the only way out, someone said. At first, I almost laughed. School, that was for people who had homes, parents, stability. Not someone like me, but the idea didn't leave. It followed me for days, then weeks, quietly growing in the back of my mind. I had spent years learning how to survive physically, but what if there was a way to escape all of this completely? Not just endure life, but control it. I started small. I found discarded books near a market, torn and incomplete, but still readable. At night, under dim streetlights, or in corners where no one would bother me, I taught myself. Words turned into sentences, sentences into understanding. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I was too tired to focus. Sometimes hunger made the letters blur. Sometimes the voices in my head told me it was pointless, that someone like me didn't get to dream about a future. But I ignored them, because for the first time since I was 13, I felt something different. Purpose. Years passed and my efforts began to shape something real. I managed to get small, consistent work at a warehouse. The pay was low, but it was steady. More importantly, it gave me something I had never truly had before: routine. With routine came discipline, and with discipline came progress. I saved every coin I could. I avoided distractions, avoided people who dragged me back into chaos. I built a life brick by brick, even when it felt like I was the only one who could see it forming. Eventually, an opportunity came. A night program that allowed people like me, people who had nothing, to learn, to qualify, to step into a different world. I took it without hesitation. Balancing work and study nearly broke me. Days were long, nights even longer. There were moments I fell asleep sitting up, moments I questioned if it was worth it. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered that night. The rain, the silence, the feeling of being unwanted, and I pushed harder, because I refused to let that be the story that defined me. Slowly, things began to change. The knowledge I gained opened doors, small ones at first, then bigger ones. I moved from labor work to office tasks, from carrying boxes to managing them, from being invisible to being noticed. People started to see something in me, potential. It was a strange feeling being valued after years of being ignored. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for it to disappear, like everything else in my life had. But it didn't. Instead, it grew. By my early 20s, I had done something I once thought was impossible. I had stability. A place to live, a steady income, a life that didn't revolve around survival anymore. But I didn't stop. Because stability wasn't enough. I didn't just want to live. I wanted to succeed, so I took risks. I invested what little I had into a small venture. It failed. I tried again, failed again. Each failure hurt. But it didn't destroy me. I had already survived worse. Failure wasn't abandonment. It wasn't betrayal. It was a lesson, and I learned fast. On my third attempt, something clicked. The timing, the decisions, the effort, it all aligned. What started as something small began to grow. And then it grew more. Years of struggle, discipline, and relentless focus finally paid off. The business expanded. Opportunities multiplied. The life I had once only imagined became real, solid, undeniable. I had built something from nothing. Not because anyone helped me, but because no one did. By the time I was 28, I stood in a home I owned, surrounded by everything I had earned. The silence there was different, not empty, but peaceful. Yet even in that success, one thing never left me. That memory, not as pain anymore, but as fuel. Because every achievement, every step forward, carried the same quiet message. They left me with nothing. And somehow I turned it into everything. I used to think success would feel loud, like celebration. Like relief, like finally being able to breathe without weight on my chest. But when it actually arrived, it was quieter than I expected. My home was still in the early morning silence when the knock came. 3 sharp taps, not urgent enough to be an emergency. Not casual enough to ignore. I paused. Visitors were rare. Business meetings happened elsewhere. Friends were even rarer. I set my cup down and walked toward the door without rushing. Because in the life I had built, nothing ever demanded panic anymore. Another knock, this time softer. Something about it felt uncertain. I opened the door, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. 2 figures stood there, older, fragile, weathered by time in a way that made them almost unrecognizable at first glance, but not enough to hide who they were. My past stood on my doorstep. My mother's eyes were red, swollen like she had been crying for days. My father looked thinner, smaller, like life had slowly stripped him down to something unsteady. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. The world felt suspended between then and now. Then my mother's lips trembled. We found you," she whispered. Found me, the word almost made me laugh. I leaned slightly against the doorframe, studying them the way I used to study people on the streets, carefully, quietly, without emotion leaking through. 15 years, that was how long it had taken for them to return. 15 years since, rain-soaked, my skin and silence replaced their promises. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't know where you ended up. We tried, you tried." I interrupted gently. My voice surprised even me. Calm, controlled, not a trace of the boy I used to be. They both flinched. My mother stepped forward slightly, hands shaking. "We had no choice back then. Things were difficult. We thought, you thought I would be fine." I asked. Silence. That silence said more than any explanation could. I looked at them properly now, not as a child, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who had already been left behind, and survived it. "I waited for you," I said quietly. My mother's eyes dropped instantly. "For days," I continued. "I stayed in that place because you told me you would come back." My father's jaw tightened. He looked away. "I was 13. I said, 13, and I believed you." The air between us felt heavier with every word. My mother began to cry. "We made mistakes. We were under pressure. We didn't have money. We didn't have support. I didn't have anything," I said. That stopped her completely. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door slightly behind me. Not shutting them out yet, just containing the moment. "I didn't have food. I didn't have safety. I didn't have anyone," I said, and I still survived. My father finally spoke, voice low. "We are your parents." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said, "you were." That word hung in the air like something irreversible. They both froze. My mother reached into her bag quickly, pulling out crumpled papers, medical reports, bills, desperation in physical form. "We need help," she said, voice breaking. "We have nowhere else." For a brief moment I saw it, not hatred. Not anger, just memory, the rain, the suitcase, the empty road, the child I had been, and then I looked at them again. The people who had caused it. I exhaled slowly. "I built everything I have without you." I said, "Every day you were gone, I was learning how to survive, then how to live, then how to succeed." My mother shook her head, tears falling freely now. "We didn't think it would become like this. That's the problem," I replied softly. "You didn't think." Silence again. this one heavier than before. I reached into my pocket, took out an envelope, and placed it gently into my father's hand. He looked down at it, confused. "It's enough to help you start over," I said. His fingers tightened around it, uncertain. "But it's not a place in my life," I added. My mother's breath hitched. "Please." I shook my head, not in anger, not in cruelty, but in finality. "I'm not the boy you left on that road anymore," I said, "and I'm not someone who needs you to complete anything." Their faces collapsed under the weight of that truth. I stepped back toward the door. "I hope you survive," I said quietly. A pause. Then I added almost gently, the way I did. "And I closed the door, not with force, not with revenge, but with peace." Inside, the silence returned, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt earned.